Tardes a todos y a todas. Soy Silvia Cassiani, soy asesora de enfermería y técnicos de salud de la Organización Panamericana de Salud en Washington, D.C. Es un honor y un placer para nosotros tener todas y todos ustedes en el webinar que va a presentar sobre el papel de la enfermera y del enfermero en el apoyo a las víctimas de la violencia de pareja. Para el webinar tenemos dos especialistas, la doctora Donna Sapela y la doctora Monique Howard. La doctora Donna Sapela es una enfermera certificada en psiquiatría, salud mental. Tiene una licenciatura de la Universidad de Indiana en portugués, una licenciatura en enfermería de la Universidad Thomas Jefferson, un máster en educación de la Universidad de Temple y un máster en ciencias de enfermería, un certificado de pós-maestría de la Escuela de Enfermería de Pensilvania y un doctorado de la Escuela de Graduados de Educación de Pensilvania. Es fundadora y editora colaboradora de la columna Mental Health Matters del American Journal of Nursing y cofundadora y editora asociada del Journal of Human Trafficking. Es la antigua profesora asociada de Enfermería y Justicia Social de la Facultad de Enfermería de la Universidad de Massachusetts Amherst y antigua directora de Estudios Globales de la Facultad de Enfermería y Profesiones de la Salud de Drexel. Además de la experiencia en salud mental, es reconocida como experta en tráfico de personas y tiene décadas de experiencia en la enseñanza, investigación en crisis, abuso de sustancias, la violencia doméstica y la enfermería forense. Además, la doctora Donna Sapela ha vivido en varios países de América Latina como Chile, Uruguay, Venezuela y Brasil. La doctora Monique Howard es una profesional de la salud pública centrada en la salud de la mujer hace más de 25 años. La doctora Howard es una líder ejecutiva que ha dirigido varias organizaciones sin lucro en Nueva Jersey y Pensilvania. La doctora Howard es una líder de opinión en Estados Unidos en temas que afectan a las mujeres y a las comunidades. En la actualidad es la directora senior de iniciativas de salud de la mujer en el Centro de Salud Global de la Mujer de la Universidad de Pensilvania. La doctora Howard ya ha viajado por Estados Unidos y Sudáfrica, formando a miembros de la comunidad y facilitadores profesionales para aumentar la capacidad de crear políticas, sistemas y cambios ambientales que creen soluciones sostenibles. La doctora Howard tiene un doctorado en educación sexual humana en la Universidad de Pensilvania. Es un gusto para nosotras tener la exposición de dos expertos en esos temas como han escuchado. Quería decirles que, por favor, la presentación será hecha en inglés, pero ustedes tienen interpretación al español. Si van ahí en la pantalla, abajo van a ver un globo. Se hace un clic en ese globo y pueden seleccionar la presentación en español. Y así todos vamos a escuchar muy bien. Muchas gracias, doctora Donna, doctora Monique. Por favor, the floor is yours to start. Thank you. Please open your microphone.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm excited about talking to you about intimate partner violence this afternoon. Next slide. So intimate partner violence, or IPV, is, as you see, a pattern of abusive behavior in any relationship. And that abusive behavior can be physical, sexual, emotional, economic, or psychological, right? Or any types of threats that the person may make to the partner. This can include intimidation, manipulation, humiliation, isolating yourself or being isolated from family and friends, terrorizing, threatening, blame, hurt, or wounding. So specifically for this evening, a lot of our conversation will be based on adolescents. And so, sorry, next slide. And so here are some adolescent statistics. We did locate specifically some statistics in Colombia, Peru, Argentina, Panama, Costa Rica, and Ecuador. And this was particularly during the COVID lockdown, where the domestic violence call centers or helplines saw an increase in calls to their centers. And that not only happened in South America, but it also happened in the United States as well. And I'm sure that most call centers for domestic violence saw an uptick, particularly because families were quarantined with the people that were abusing them. And so teens often don't think that behaviors like teasing and name calling are actual precursors to domestic violence, and they're labeled normal behaviors. And what we ought to teach our children, instead of, oh, they're teasing you because they like you, which is what some of us have heard, and even some of the messaging that we may have sent to our kids. But the reality is those are behaviors antecedent to some type of abuse later on in the relationship, either in that pair or the person may be abusive in other relationships. So let's go next slide. Other statistics, female students, if we're looking at particularly in school settings, experience higher rates of physical and sexual abuse during dating than male students. And then students that identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer, or those that are unsure of their identity, are more likely to experience violence, physical or sexual, in a dating relationship more than those that identify as heterosexual. Next slide. There is data and reports to suggest that adolescents and teens that experience any type of intimate partner violence in the home will then most likely continue those behaviors in their own relationships. And so this is familial, this is cyclic, and so we should spend some time trying to solve for violence in the family so that it does not continue in other families and in other households. And again, frequent exposure to a violence in the home not only predisposes children to numerous social and physical problems, but it also teaches them that violence is okay, that violence is the way to settle disputes and settle conflict, and that it's normal when we know that violence isn't normal in the households. Next slide. So this particular depiction is the cycle of violence, right? And so there's a lot of data to support that violence occurs in this cycle, and it will always be the same cycle. And so the first part of the cycle is we'll start at the explosion, which is in the upper right-hand corner. And that is the actual incident, the violent incident. So it's hitting, choking, humiliation, imprisonment, rape, use of weapons, right? And that is what the batterer is doing. And when actually the victim's response is to protect themselves any way that they can, call the police. Police are generally called by a neighbor or the children, if there's children in the household. Tries to calm the batterer down so that they don't experience any additional abuse. Reasoning, leave if necessary, and fight back. Right after the explosion, and the explosions are progressive. And so the first incident of violence may not at all look like the second or third incident. So it may start with a shove, but it'll progress to hitting, smacking, throwing, and continued battering. The honeymoon phase comes right after the explosion. And what happens in this phase is that the batterer is extremely apologetic. There's a lot of I'm sorries, begging for forgiveness, perhaps buying gifts. This is when they may promise to go seek help and seek counseling. I know there's something wrong with me. I'll go get help, I promise. So they may go to church. They may go to Alcoholics Anonymous. They may go to Narcotics Anonymous. You may get that bag that you wanted that you had your eye on. I remember speaking to someone and they were really excited that they got a brand new Coach bag. But there was abuse that occurred prior to receiving the Coach bag. There just fundamentally has to be another way to get a bag, right, from your partner. But this is all part of the apology. And so what happens in the honeymoon phase, it's new, it's romantic, there's a lot of attention. The victim agrees to stay because they think that the honeymoon phase will be that's the end of the abuse, and and their relationship will be exactly like it is on a honeymoon. They take the batterer back, they leave. If they went to a shelter, they leave the shelter, they leave any housing that they went to as a safety precaution. They're getting along great. They're hopeful for their future. They're setting up appointments for the batterer. And that period lasts, from a day, weeks, months. That period can last for a year. And everything is okay in that period. And then something happens. And in that something happens is the tension begins to come back. And you don't know what it is that started the tension. You don't know how long the tension building phase is going to be, but you know how the tension phase ends. It ends again on the other side of the cycle in an explosion. But the tension phase, the batterer can be moody. They're going to pick fights. They're going to drink more, stay out later, more yelling, be sullen, angry. The victim's response here is kind of similar to the victim's response after the acute explosion. They attempt to calm the partner down. They become much more nurturing. They either become silent or talkative, depending upon what the needs of the batterer are. Tries to stay away, but also tries to stay on whatever the schedule was, right? So it's a combination of both. Tries to navigate the house and keep the house quiet and keep the children at bay, very agreeable, tries to reason, cooks favorite foods and things like that, because they know the tension is building, but the victim is trying very hard to relax and make things okay. And then back to the other side of the cycle, the tension building phase is something that lasts for a week, a couple of days, a month, and then it ends, and it ends again with some type of acute explosion. And so that's the cycle of violence, and that's what happens in these relationships that have some type of violence to it. And so the best time to interact with a victim is at the honeymoon phase, right? Get them there, get them right after the incident, help them with safety planning, and we'll talk about some strategies later. But that's a really good time to intervene, and hoping that intervention becomes something that's long lasting. We can go to the next slide. And so intimate partner violence is kind of the new jargon word, right? It used to just be domestic violence. Intimate partner violence is now a huge umbrella under which all familial and relationship abuse occurs. So it's family violence, domestic violence, child sexual abuse and neglect, rape and sexual assault are under the umbrella, crimes of assault and crimes of passion, elder abuse, which we don't spend enough time talking about abuse that our elders get, female genital mutilation, and then trafficking for labor and also trafficking for sex also fit under intimate partner violence. Next slide. So we look at who's giving and who's receiving, right? And what our data suggests is in the majority, right? So most of the times the data says that the perpetrator or the batterer are men. They can be family members, some type of authority figure, boyfriends, husbands, drug and alcohol users or substance users, right? And so we're not going to spend a lot of time here talking about all of the whys, but the whys are basically, people that need to express power and control in their relationships in order to be the boss, right? To be the lead in the relationship. There might be some underlying issues around self-esteem, but definitely needs of control are there. And who are the victims? The victims are generally women, children and adolescents, and women, and particularly women that are pregnant. There's a high incidence of domestic violence in women that are pregnant, low-income women, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, questioning, plus individuals, and then anyone that we deem as different, right? And so that could be a person with some type of different ability, whether it's learning, physical, sight, or hearing. And the whys are, these may be individuals that the society deems as weak or not as strong as or less than. And also in some instances, victims are invisible. A group of people that we do not notice, that our society just doesn't pay much attention to. And those are individuals that end up in the role of a victim. So talking about teens again, and going back to where we were talking about teens, our teens that experience intimate partner violence are more likely to experience depression and anxiety and nervousness, participate in unhealthy behaviors, tobacco use, drug, alcohol use, and not just the experimental levels that adolescents do, but more heavier drug and alcohol use. Exhibit antisocial behaviors like lying, theft, bullying. I'm sorry, I didn't tell you to move to the next slide, but this is fine. And hitting, and then thoughts of suicide. And so when we look at our teens, right, as parents, as healthcare providers, when we see our teen doing something that's uncharacteristic of them, that is when we should be alert to something is going on. And it could be a partner violence situation, it could be other situations, but that's when we should really ask questions. So from a healthcare provider perspective, if your patient comes in and they look and seem and smell different than your history with them and or different than what the chart says, then this is a great time for you to begin to ask questions. My children's practitioners always ask about grades. That's a really good indicator of something going wrong. If you have a student that was doing really good in school and marginal and their grades begin to drop, those are some indicators as well. Next slide. So I'm not going to review everything on this slide. There's a lot on this slide, but as we see, there are medical and mental health outcomes to particularly teens that have been intimate partner violence. So there's different types of injury, strains, contusions, lacerations that don't match the story, right? I banged into the wall, I fell down the stairs, I tripped. And, you know, when you do some of those things, you don't get a black eye from them, right? And I fall down the stairs all the time, and I've never got a black eye from falling down the stairs. And so the injury has to match the story, right? Some of the chronic conditions that are particularly stress related, you may see an increase in. Some mental health conditions and substance misuse, you may see more. Depression, where you haven't seen depression in a patient before, more anxiety disorders, including symptoms of PTSD, PTS, eating disorders, suicidal behavior and ideologies. You will see more urologic and gynecological problems as well, particularly if there's rape and sexual assault that's going on with a partner that's also having intercourse with other people outside of the relationship. So you might see HIV, other sexually transmitted diseases and infections, urinary tract infections, menstrual problems, unplanned pregnancy, and the like. Pregnancy and peripartum related conditions, obstetrical complications, perinatal depression and anxiety, and that is something that we should look for anyway in any of our assessments for a postpartum woman. You know, that's something that's a clue to what's going on at home as well. A pregnant woman that is smoking and alcohol or substance use. And again, death due to homicide or suicide during pregnancy is an indicator because violence does increase during that time. And then other conditions that don't necessarily fit, frequent headaches, difficulty sleeping, palpitations, fibromyalgia, limitations in activity, lack of desire to do much, are all indicators of intimate partner violence. Next slide. Okay. So, what are some of the warning signs? And I did go over some, but we'll go over them more for teens. And this is for, you know, as medical providers when doing assessments. This is for parents that are raising children. This is for any youth serving individual that's out there. Sudden changes in appearance, diet, and sleeping habits. If you're going from a young person that is always fashionable and always cued into what to wear and how to wear it, from there in the shift to oversized pants and sweatshirts that are 2 sizes too big and baseball caps that kind of cover their face. Those are those drastic appearance changes that we should look out for. Diet changes, an extreme weight loss and or weight gain. Sleeping habits that are challenges sleeping, maybe resorting back to peeing in the bed, things like that are indicators. We talked about failing grades, dropping out of school activities that they once were involved in, and you know, the athlete that no longer plays the sport anymore. Moody, increased mood swings and personality that are outside of what the mood swings are for adolescents. And so we think that some of these warning signs are part of adolescence and when they're actually indicators of something else going on. avoiding friends and family and not wanting to be near people that know them well enough to know that something's wrong. And adults do the same thing too. When something is going on in our world, we avoid people that know us. Secretive and withdrawn, apologizing and making excuses for the dating partner. So, when a partner is violent, it's really hard to, when there's violence in a relationship, it's kind of hard to hide that. And so when the couple are together, a batterer may act out, may say something that's off, may act in a way that's off, and what the victim will do is apologize for their behavior. Constantly checking their cell phone and their email, making sure that they respond to the partner in a timely manner. It gets upset when they're unable to respond. And then the unexplained bruises, scratches, or marks that don't match the story. Don't match the story that they're telling. Okay. And when this happens, right? One of the person that spends the most time with the child is the parent. And so talking to children about healthy relationships before they start dating. And that's kind of hard for parents to talk about healthy relationships if they haven't had that as a role model. And so what the practitioners can do is support what healthy relationships looks like, so the parents have information to give to their child. Teach children to respect themselves and respect their boundaries. Keep the lines of communication open. Encourage your child to come to you if they have any problems in the relationship at any space. And then making space for when your child comes to talk to you. And so one of the strategies that parents do is, like, as soon as the child comes into the room, they stop whatever they're doing to give that child 100%. And that allows the child to see that my parent has time for me and is not too busy for me, and are more likely to tell you things as opposed to keeping them hidden because my parent doesn't have time. Using teachable moments to talk about healthy relationships, boundaries, and consent. And so that looks like when you're watching TV together, or when you're viewing something on social media, using all the opportunities to talk about healthy relationship, that's healthy, this isn't healthy, why do you think this is healthy, and really talk. Not just one way, but having a back and forth conversation, but using a situation that you both experience as a teachable moment. Be open, understanding, and non-judgmental, which is really hard because our children are of a different generation, and sometimes we are old. And sometimes they say and or do something that we absolutely don't understand how they got there, but we can guide them, right? Listen to your child and their experiences and the experiences of their friends, and refrain from lecturing, but really just listen. And this is a really important one. Teach your child to be assertive and set personal boundaries, right? And that comes with, what does healthy relationship look like? And so when you can have those conversations about healthy relationships, then you kind of support them in owning that so that they can set their boundaries. Donna?
First off, I want to say buenas tardes a todos. It's a real pleasure to be here with everyone this evening. And I visited a number of your countries. I'm coming to you this evening from Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. So thank you, Monique, for that. And we want to talk about what parents can do about teen dating violence. I think it's important to, as Monique said, talk to children about, well, this slide was already done, I think. So is that where you left off? Talking to your children ahead of time, right? Being role models. I do want to point out too that it's important, we're talking here about girls mostly, and that tends to be that population, females, whether adults or adolescents, tend to experience a larger portion of violence, intimate and domestic, than males. But it is certainly possible, and it does happen, that boys and men are often victims of violence. And also we need to remember too, that it's not just, the heterosexual relationships. Women and men in homosexual relationships can also be victims of domestic violence, of interpersonal violence. So I think, that's something that we need to keep in mind when we're working with any clients as a nurse. I think too, an important thing for us as nurses, people tend to respect nurses. They tend to have a lot of trust in us. So I think that puts us in a good place to ask the right questions. But when we're with our patients, and again, many of us are parents too, we should look at the patient, the client, our child, to see if the person seems afraid or anxious to please their partner. There's often a history of walking on eggshells. It goes along with everything the partner wants to do. Again, there's an unequal balance of power in these relationships often, because if things were equal, there wouldn't be any opportunity to perpetrate some of the violence. If they have to check with the partner too, to kind of, and again, I work a lot in human trafficking. Part of my experiences is working with women here who had to ask the pimp or the trafficker if they could go to the bathroom, if they could do this, that, or the other thing, if they could wear that dress. Sometimes it's not abnormal to say, do you mind if I go out with my friends for dinner tomorrow? That's common courtesy. But if it becomes all the time that you have to get someone else's permission, that is not a good sign. So parents need to be aware of that. With the internet, we see more sort of violence, harassment, trying to control the other person, phone calls constantly. And again, even with young girls, where are you going? Millions of phone calls, texts, even putting tracer devices on people's vehicles to see where they've been and what they're up to. And if they kind of talk, sometimes they will give away that adolescents will talk about some issues that might to them seem normal, but, oh, it's so cute. He's really jealous if some other guy looks at me. Well, again, once you cross a certain line, that is not a good thing. So it's something that parents and nurses, we need to be aware of, and we need to ask those questions. Next slide, please. So during some general warning signs. And again, if the child comes to you, I don't care what kind of nurse you are. I'm mental health. So this sort of falls into but if you're a pediatric nurse, if you're working, in any other area of nursing, and they come to you because you're having a headache, for example, or, they've got maybe some medical issues. We still, in the United States, we still screen. Do you feel safe at home? We ask for some of these questions. We do an assessment for suicidal ideation. So I don't care what it is, what area of nursing, it's good to also, ask your patient, ask your, or even the parents, if the parents are with him or her. But does someone have frequent injuries? And Monique already went over quite a bit of this, that they shouldn't have. All right. Now, the normal is okay if they're play sports or something. If they frequently miss school, this often happens. Again, I've worked with young girls and women who were trafficked. They would miss school and work because they were just made to work all night, dating, quote unquote, which is mean they're having sex. If they dress in clothing that's designed to hide scars, if it's 100 degrees out, and they're covered up with a sweatshirt, that is not good. If they become narrow focus with their friends and family, if they're, not allowed to have access, and their time becomes more and more limited with friends and family. If their level of self-confidence changes, that's another key warning sign. And again, adolescence is difficult. I don't care where you live, some of the same issues, American adolescents, Peruvian, Ecuadorian, etc. So sometimes it's hard to tease out, what's sort of a normal process and some of the normal issues that teenagers are going through. But we're looking for major personality changes. Certainly that's a giveaway, major. Although sometimes this can start out a little bit at a time. Depression can start with just something minor and just keep building. So it's important to keep your eye on things and you have your patient come back. We're actually working with the parents. If we're talking about adolescents, parents are also a big important piece of this, that I would hope that, as nurses, we would give some information to the parents. I know I taught high school believe it or not, I taught high school Spanish and English. We would have presentations to the classes, to the students themselves. So I think that's something the school nurse could actually, go in and do some teaching and things for the students themselves to be aware of, not just, the parents. Next slide, please. So some questions to ask. You build up a little rapport. And as I say, I think, again, in general, nurses tend to be very trusted people. Does your partner, your boyfriend, or your girlfriend humiliate or yell at you? Are they very critical and put you down? Do they treat you so badly that you're embarrassed in front of your friends? You don't want anybody to see what your boyfriend or girlfriend is doing to you. Do they ignore you or make you feel that you're invisible or that you're inconsequential, that nothing you think or say should matter? Do they blame you for their own behavior? You wore that dress and I don't like, I don't like it. And that's why I had to hit you. And do they treat the person as property? One of the signs too, which was mentioned, bite marks, bruising, etc., tattooing. Again, that's pretty common in prostitution and human trafficking. The trafficker or the pimp will tattoo the victim, male or female, which means they literally are their property, right? So that's something, that we can talk to the students about or the patients that we're working with. And again, teachers play a big role in this. I did some training for the teachers when I taught high school of what to look for in the students. So that's also another population that we should reach out to. Next slide, please. The nursing role. Here, trauma-informed care is very important because oftentimes victims won't say anything because they feel that they're responsible. So it's important to kind of address, listen, this is normal. People who go through, I understand that you really love him or her and that, there are some good qualities. Not everybody's 100% evil or has bad qualities. So you're going to, sort of commend them and kind of acknowledge that this person isn't all bad. However, love or friendship or caring shouldn't be this way. And you would acknowledge the pain that they're feeling and make the patient, the client, the adolescent, not feel that it's his or her fault. Why do they stay? Again, we know that in domestic violence or intimate partner violence, people can stay because they're threatened or because their self-esteem is so low. They're told constantly that nobody else would want them. And again, sometimes it's they really have this feeling of love. I worked with a woman whose pimp had run over her, severely ruined her leg. And I said, why did you stay with him? And she said, because I loved him. Right. But you try to help people understand that love doesn't hurt, as an earlier picture conveyed to us. Also, with the what we can do, leaving can kill you. We know that one of the most dangerous times is when someone tries to leave a relationship. We know this with adult men and women, and we also know this with adolescent boys and girls. So you should have a plan. Also, cultural and religious considerations, right? Some places, once you're married, you're engaged or something, you don't go beyond that. And we do have adolescents in some states here who are able to get married or be involved with somebody at a serious level. Socioeconomic factors, again, not so much adolescents, but in adult women, it's the abusers paying the bills, they don't have a job, but also with socioeconomic factors for adolescents. They might be getting some benefits from this relationship that are economic. And social norms, right? You're supposed to stay with somebody, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The religion says you're supposed to do that. So all these things have to be considered. Next slide, please. So what can we do as clinicians, as nurses? Well, support people, help them understand that love shouldn't hurt, but acknowledge the positive things they feel about the abuser, but help them to see that that's not healthy for them. We express concern, right? We can ask if something is wrong and let them talk. In many situations, we try to normalize some of this. It's okay, it's when you feel this way about someone, but and those feelings can be quite normal, but we don't want to be judgmental. Collect evidence. Oftentimes, again, with some bruises, etc., things just don't add up. Bite marks, anything you can find. I've had women who had their eyelids glued together, stab marks, bite marks, cigarette burns, pulled hair. This happens with adolescents as well. Bites are another thing. And again, in the United States, we are mandated reporters. If we suspect that a minor, anyone under 18, is being abused, we are required by law to report it. I'm not sure if the same is the same thing in South America. So I think, we have to realize that, again, what we're saying about adolescents can also be applied to adults. A lot of this is similar, whether the victim is, 15, 30, 40, 60, etc. it's sort of, this is something that crosses all borders and all boundaries. But I think too, we have nurses in our schools in the United States. I'm not sure if the same is true in South America, if there are school nurses, but I did some forensic training with school nurses because they're often in school settings where they can see these adolescents and notice anything. Sometimes these students spend more time at school than they might at home with the family. And again, sometimes if the parents, particularly the mother, has been a victim herself, they've got their own worries to do, and they might not be paying such close attention. Again, so we do want to educate the families, and we want to encourage particularly those nurses that work in pediatrics, those nurses that work in schools that are around young people. We want to educate them as well. And the other thing too is that don't forget in sports. I have a daughter who was playing on a softball team, a lot of adolescent girls. Be careful of the coaches. Two of the coaches tried to entice the girls to some drinking while they were playing an away game overnight. So we need to, who is victimizing? Not just the boyfriend, but it's, people on the periphery. So as we know here, we had, some of the priests, the religion were abusing young people. Any nurse should warn parents and the child herself or himself that if an adult male who's maybe a coach or anything seems to spend an inordinate amount of time being of interest, taking the kids, for ice cream all the time, that could open the door to some abuse as well. So I think that's it. The next slide, I think, are just some of the references. Okay. Oh, no, there's not. Okay. So what we should not do with our folks here, don't wait till someone comes to you, because sometimes they won't. They're scared. They've been threatened, and they might not want. It's uncomfortable. There's a lot of stigma attached with being abused. People are embarrassed to report this, especially girls and boys, and they think it might be normal. We don't judge people. We don't find fault. We don't pressure. This is not the Inquisition. We often don't, tell people what to do either. Now, again, there's sometimes when we do, it is necessary, but it's also good to help come to the same conclusion with the adolescent. Okay. And we don't put conditions there that they have to meet. That's not the best thing to do either. So, and judgmental, never. We're not judgmental. And we don't place conditions on your support. Well, if you want to keep seeing me, if this, that, or the other thing, you have to do this. Again, the best thing to do is work with the adolescent to see what would be helpful to him or her and how to go about this. So I think now that's the last slide. There we go. And we have some good references there. Now I tried to find some things in Spanish, and we do in my Journal of Human Trafficking. We do get people who write in Spanish, but then they have to translate it into English, but I couldn't find anything. So these are all in English, but you can probably, get someone to help translate some of these things. So again, thank you all very much. It's been a pleasure. And I guess now we open it to questions or comments or whatever.
Muchas gracias, doutora Monique. Muchas gracias, doutora Dona Sabela. Foi excelente essa conferência, esse webinar. Aprendemos muitíssimo com vocês. Pero como temos alguns minutos mais, me gostaria poner uma pergunta que está no chat. E a pergunta é, quizás para ti, doutora Monique, es cómo romper el ciclo de la violencia en las parejas adolescentes. La pregunta es cómo romper el ciclo de la violencia en las parejas adolescentes.
That's a question for me.
Yes.
Traduzca en inglés, por favor.
Yes, the question is how to break the cycle of violence in the adolescents, adolescents who are engaged, for example.
Yeah, sure. How to break that cycle of violence, right? So first you have to recognize as a family that you're in the cycle, right? And that's very important because many families don't know that they're in the midst of an abusive relationship, right? And so one of the key things to do is, you know, as practitioners, is you have to inform people. It doesn't necessarily mean you take out the cycle of abuse and you show them where they are, but you have a conversation with them about where they are, about their experiences thus far, and then you talk about how to break it, right? How to break that cycle so that you know, they don't, it's not something that they repeat in that relationship or with their family. But it takes conversation, it takes a trusted relationship, and it takes honest and good quality information about the cycle. And then the strategy piece, how to create a safety plan so that they can safely leave that relationship. And as Dr. Sabella mentioned, leaving is one of the other spaces where it's likely to be much more violent and or result in death, right? So it's scary. And so how do we create safety planning? If there's a domestic violence agency to call, that is what they do. They help plan and they help get you out safely. And whether it's a relationship where the person lives in the house with you or outside of the house, it's actually a dating person. They'll give you those strategies.
I could just add to that too.
Sure.
I think it's extremely important because again, kids can be very fearful, right? So they really need to know that they're going to get some support. And there's several layers, family support. If the mother or father or the family doesn't believe them and kind of poo-poos it, that's not good. So they need that right then and there. And then also moving out to larger circles, law enforcement. There are, again, we have domestic violence centers where people can actually get housing. Now, again, if you're 15 years old, you can't go out on your own. But, if the family needs to move, or if there's a mother and a daughter or mother and son, they can be moved out of the house and put somewhere. I also think, too, one of the things, you can't control, we were saying in addiction, you can't control what other people do. You can control what you do. And I think to have the person who is experiencing the violence, it's good to get some counseling to look at, what did to reflect, why this, how you can learn from this, how you can build up your self-confidence, how you can help yourself moving forward into adulthood as you get older. So I do think there are support groups there even for young people we have here that they can, join in with that, and also get some counseling, because it does take it, being victimized can take a lot out of you, and maybe even some medication. We do have medications, antidepressants, etc., PTSD, some of those things that can help somebody to take care of themselves, to then remove themselves from the situation. Oftentimes it doesn't work to tell the victim, you can't see him or her anymore. That tends to drive people closer at times. So,
and I want to say this because I'm with my limited abilities reading some of the comments that are coming up in the chat, but I don't want to get in trouble, Miss Sylvia, and want you to think that I can understand what's being said in the chat. But culture is very important, right? And what does culture say about people's roles in the relationship and what they can and cannot do? And so within the culture, within machismo and marianismo, right? How can you? I did get caught that time. I just realized. How can you use your cultural values to keep people safe in their relationships, right? So machismo doesn't mean that you beat your partner, right? That's not what that means. The marianismo is not about you take the abuse and you're really that passive and you take the abuse. So how do you use cultural values to keep the relationship and keep the individual safe?
And it's not easy. I mean, if we look at what's going on in the Middle East with the woman not wearing her headdress correctly. The other thing too, I'm Italian. All right, we had the Italian men were wearing undershirts called wife beater undershirts. I mean, you go to buy, and we all know what that means. If I were to ask someone a wife beater undershirt, the concept of keeping someone in English under your thumb, all right, we talk about keeping women under our thumb for men, meant that you could only beat a woman with a stick that was no bigger than your thumb. So again, even here where we think we're emancipated, just the culture forget adolescent girls, against women. I'm writing a chapter now for a book on the violence for women universally and historically is just incredibly jaw-dropping. You know, so yeah.
Excellent. And also there is another question, since we have many nurses that works in school. We do have school nurses in some countries in Latin America, and they are here with us. And there is a question from one of them, what would be the best and adequate way to intervene in the acute moment of the violence with the adolescents. For example, if they are in school, how to deal with this moment of violence between adolescents. And the question is, should we inform the parents about this violence, for example, in the school environment with adolescents, and how to intervene?
Well,
I think first of all, the school should have a policy, because today is not the first day there's been violence. So any school should have some sort of policy on what to do. And you don't wait until there's an emergency or an issue to do something. I also think too, again, I think the parents, I had that happen when, again, I wasn't the school nurse, but I was a nurse. I was in the school teaching English and Spanish, and there were some issues. I talked to our principal, and we called the parents. The parents need to know that their child is being abused, and that their child is the abuser, or there's some issues. Sometimes other students will share that information with the school nurse or a trusted teacher. Teachers are also mandated reporters, and we are required if something violent happens in the school. I think assemblies are a very good way, though, to start maybe in 9th grade with assemblies about what's normal, what's acceptable, to start educating, maybe even 8th grade, you know, our version of 8th grade. So that's my take on that. But yes, they do need to be intervened, and sometimes kids will get expelled if they can't behave.
Sure. And again, it does depend on what the reporting requirements are by the nurses and teachers in these countries. I applaud the fact that a nurse would receive that information from a student. That means that relationship is there, again, from the teachers as well. And I would use that relationship to inform the student about healthy relationships and about the fact that what's going on in their relationship is not healthy. And how do we work on self-esteem, self-value, and self-worth, right? And then have conversations about consent and permission. You know, we use that terminology, we throw those words around a lot, consent, and nobody knows what they mean, right? And so, you know, can we just make that practical and talk about permission and talk about boundaries? And I remember hearing from a young woman once who said that, you know, if you cannot treat me this way, you are absolutely not allowed to treat me this way. No one treats me this way, and you can't either, right? And I think another thing that's really important in all of our relationships is we honestly think that is going to be the last and only relationship we're going to have. And It's not, right? It's not. You know, I validate the emotions of teens, and I love, and yes, that's great. But, you know, as adults, we do the same thing. That is not going to be your last relationship. If you are not with that person, that does not mean you're any less a person. You can find, you know, partners are like transportation. If you stand outside at the bus stop, another bus is gonna come, right? Another train, another whatever, it's gonna come. And you know, so with feeling good about yourself, then you find a partner that's gonna treat you as though you're you know, royalty.
This reminds me of a saying in Portuguese: "O amor é como trem, sempre acabe mais Love is like a train. There's always room for one more. One more thing too we did, which was successful. We had a couple of former victims come and speak at an assembly who were their age, a little older maybe, could relate. And again, you want to pick someone who can do this, do it well, and they're on the verge of recovery. But that really meant more than, you know, some 40-year-old teacher talking to a 16-year-old student.
Right.
So you can invite in people who've been there, done that, and that opens a lot of eyes among the youth. So
Excellent. We are in our time, but I want that you could give a last message to all the nurses that are with us. So something that when we close the webinar, they will still thinking maybe at night or tomorrow or even in 1 year, they will have this message in their mind. Some nurses that are working with adolescents in school or even in health units, or they care, they prevent disease. What is your last message to our participants?
I think for me as a nurse, you could be the nurse that makes all the difference in a child's life. So we hold an important place, and you could be the difference.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Monique?
thank you. I was the same thing, is that we all play a role in saving the lives of individuals, and that's a role that I take very seriously. And making sure the information I relay is going to help them save their life.
And I will say to all the participants, please spread this knowledge. Talk to others about what you heard today, tonight. Tell them about your thoughts and how we can prevent violence, how we can work with adolescents in this situation, and how we can make better health to all of them in our Latin America countries. Thank you so much, Donna. Thank you, Monique. Thank you to all participants. Thank you to our interpreters in this webinar. And see you in the next webinar that will be in October 18th, next week. Monique will be with us again, and we are going to talk about cyberbullying, bullying, and so on. Very good and important topic as well. See you in the next week. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Ciao.
Thank you.
Buenas noches, boa noite. Ciao.
Buenas noches.